Awesome. I love when we start right at the very beginning and we don't have to edit that later. That makes it super nice for me to not have to do that. Awesome. Welcome to the Philly Azure March meeting. So thank you all for coming out. We have a couple great sessions tonight. Oops, let's do that. So it's the usual agenda. I'll go through some brief announcements. We will thank our wonderful sponsor, Nudesic, and we will talk about the two sessions that we have coming up. So jumping into that, I do have a couple of announcements. For this, there is a ton of Azure news, and that is pretty much the same announcement we have every month, except this month I'm just going to point you to the Azure blog with the announcements tag. If you have not seen the Azure blog, please check it out. It has a ton of good stuff. They write, I want to say his name is Rob from Microsoft. He's fantastic. He writes a weekly wrap up of Azure news. So go check that out. There's also a live announcements feed as well. So if nothing else, go there, thread down the announcements and the This Week in Azure recap post. Those two are really going to keep you up to date on what is going on in Azure. For sure, I can't think of anything off of the top of my head to highlight, so I will just say highlight that and go check it out. Our next monthly meeting is currently to be determined, but you will obviously get to the email and the invite once we have that locked in place and we have the date set out. So it is normally, I think it's the second Tuesday of the month, so I'd say it's probably going to be 410, but we still are figuring out logistics around speakers. We have a number of them. We'll have an April meeting, I promise. I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Nudesic, and for sponsoring the meetup and for coming out here. They will be saying just a few words to us in a minute. I wanted to say that first. I also wanted to say I believe that they are looking to hire. So if you are looking to hire, raise your hand. I know there's a couple people here that are looking to hire. And if you are looking for a job, also raise your hand. Half will take it. I'm sure the rest of them are already outside. So if you are looking, there are people looking to hire you, including our wonderful sponsor, Nudesic. As a reminder, the first one tonight will be SQL Azure with Eric, and the second one will be an overview of Serverless and how to implement Azure functions with Rufus. So thank you to everybody involved in that. And we'll just take 1 second to switch over to Nudesic. They have a few slides that they would like to present.
Hello? All right. We're good? All right. Thank you. I'll keep it brief because you guys have a lot more interesting things to do tonight than to listen to me. Brian is here with Nudesic, and he's one of the organizers of this group. I'm assuming you know him. He's been with Nudesic for a while. I understand you guys were looking for a sponsor, so I figured I'd come and get some pizza and not go home to 2 sick kids. So thank you for allowing me to come here tonight instead. I do have to go home in time for bed, though, for the kids, so I won't be able to make it all day. I just want to introduce you guys real quickly to Nudesic. Pretty quick intro. Raise your hand if you've heard of Nudesic. Okay, that's about what we see, right? So we have done some really cool projects across the world, been around for 16 years. We've done a terrible job of marketing. We're trying to fix that now. We've been around since 2002. Our 3 founders, they all came from Microsoft on the West Coast. We're headquartered out of California, and over the last 16 years, we've worked our way east. The Philly office has been here for 9 years, right? So we're not new in the area by any means. We've done a lot of cool stuff, just haven't really gotten our name out that well. Strong relationships with Microsoft, and in addition to our U.S. Offices, we have 4 offices in India. All employees, no subcontractors, some really good consultants across the world. What we do, obviously we do consulting work, so that's primarily what we do. That's how we got started. As a result of building some pretty cool applications at our clients, we got into managed services, so we can do tier 1, 2, and 3 support on the applications that we build or on other applications that our clients might have. And in the course of building products for our clients, we've also seen some gaps in the marketplace, and we've built some products. So we're a product company as well. So we kind of cross the whole gambit, and what we like to say is when you work with Nudesic, you get consultants that really understand how to build products, because that's actually what we do. We build products, we productionalize them, we figure out where they should fit in the market, what they should be costed at, and then we support them. So it's the end-to-end solution, not just building a product and walking away, and you guys got to figure out how to support it. What we do in the cloud, or how we work, real quick view of our service lines is what we call them. So we have a strategic consulting group. They come in, they don't look at technology, they just figure out what are you looking to do, what are your competitors doing, what might you want to do, what's your 5-year plan, that type of thing. And then when we get into the technology things, we have digital platforms. So that's DevOps, CI/CD, all that kind of work. It's the platforms upon which you're going to build your solutions. So we have a lot of emphasis on that right now. In fact, on Tuesday, I was right here. This wall wasn't here because we needed both rooms. We had about 60 people in here for an all-day DevOps workshop that we ran. So Greg, who runs digital platforms out of our Philly office, he ran it along with some guys from Ohio, I guess it was, who came in to help support that. We got a data and analytics group. We call it the Predictive Enterprise. And then we have Digital Workplace, which is custom app development, mobile apps, SharePoint, all that stuff. The idea of digital workplace is any solutions that kind of sit behind the firewall, or they're really for employees to use. So we have a team of people that just go out there trying to make, us, as we're in our workplace, do our jobs more efficiently. Quick slide, we work with a lot of cool companies. Here's some highlights of some companies we worked with last year alone, some really interesting success stories. I'm not going to go into them now, but we've done a lot of cool stuff. As a result of some of the cool stuff we did last year, we won a lot of really cool awards that we're proud of with Microsoft. So Microsoft has something like 600,000 vendors and partners in their ecosystem. Last year, we were named U.S. Partner of the Year across all of them, and Global Cloud Application Partner of the Year across all of them. So again, I think 4 people raised their hand that they've ever heard of us, and we're the best partner in the world for Microsoft, right? So again, failure on our part, not marketing, but we have a lot of cool technologists that do cool stuff. And I bring this up because you might want to come work for us, or you might need help with something that you're doing, or you might just want to know, right? And Brian's here, you can pick his brain at any time. Right, so we're just trying to get our name out there a little bit more. Real quick on client successes, not going to go into it. Willis Towers Watson, it's a loyalty program, right? So as you build up points with airlines, with hotels, or whatever, that sits on these companies' balance sheets. And that's a liability for them, because theoretically everyone in the world could say, I want to redeem my points tomorrow, and they need to have enough money to pay for that. They were handling that in AWS. We went in and said, get out of there. You want to come over to Azure. So we've done one line of business there. We're working on a few others to get them over to Azure, where they should be. And then second, National Student Clearinghouse. This is still going on, but they're looking to build a pretty cool product to bring something new to market that's going to allow teachers, principals, administrators, college administrators, et cetera, to really understand their students. What are they looking to do? Where did they come from? Why are some successful? Why are others not successful? It's going to be a free product, really just to make the education system better. So we're pitching Power BI down there to see if that might be something interesting to come to market. Just an example of some cool stuff we're doing. There's millions of other case studies we could have shown. There's some work going on at the NFL as well. Take a look at players. Who gets hurt? Why do they get hurt? How much are you lifting? Do you get hurt more often if you lifted yesterday? All that kind of stuff to see what's going on with the data. What's interesting here is initially this data was going to be provided only to, say, individual teams, but if they open it up where every team has access to every other team's data, if you're not looking at your own team's data and your competitors are, then you're really going to miss the mark. So just interesting what's going on in the world of sports and how technology is getting involved. There's a couple other slides. Again, I don't want to bore you. I don't want to go into it too much, but we're Nudesic. We're 5 miles up the road. We're really good at what we do. And if you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to me or Brian. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? All right, sweet. I love the setup here. It's very slick. All right. Awesome. All right. Everyone can hear me, right? We're recording? All right, well, I wanted to take a quick moment to thank everyone. Thank Microsoft, the Philly Azure user group, just starting out. So this is a pretty cool opportunity to get a chance to speak to you all. I think there's a lot of familiar faces from some of the other Microsoft user groups we have in this area. I'm going to be talking about Azure SQL Database tonight. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Furry. I manage the application development department at IT Solutions. I am a developer turned manager, which means that I spend equal time in Excel, Visual Studio, and SSMS, essentially. My personal interests are homebrew. I've got 2 beers on tap right now. One is good. One of them is not so good, but hey, it's good enough for me. I'll drink it. I have a big 20-pound cat that I love. And in my spare time, I love exploring machine learning and cloud technology. I work for IT Solutions, which is an ESOP. What is an ESOP? It's a type of ownership where 100% of the company is owned by employees. We are looking to hire, and it sounded like we didn't have too many people available right in this room that are looking, but if you are a developer, mid-level or junior, you should talk to us. We are looking to hire. Because we are 100% employee owned, we have a very distinctive and cool culture. Ownership thinking is one of our core values. We like to say that there's no politicking. All of us, we have each other's back. We also work in a wide variety of industries for our customers, which means you get a variety of work, a variety of solutions, a variety of problems, and a lot of technology to solve those problems. It's a very cool place to work. If you're looking for a development job, we would love to talk to you. All right, so what are we talking about tonight? We are going to talk about Azure SQL Database relative to SQL Server. Raise your hand for a moment. Have you worked with Azure SQL Database? Raise your hand. All right, so we have quite a few people here, which is good because I'm kind of going to introduce Azure SQL Database, but I'm going to jump into, I think, some of the features that really kind of set it apart and make it really compelling compared to either other database platforms or on-premise SQL Server. You can just do certain things with scaling a solution, a database tier on a solution in Azure that you just can't do elsewhere. And that's going to be one of the things I kind of focus on to make it really kind of interesting. We're going to have a lot of hands-on demos to spruce things up. I promise we're not going to be in PowerPoint this whole time. We're going to get hands-on and look at the APIs that allow us to scale a particular database up and down. We're going to be using Postman, Visual Studio, SSMS, kind of get our hands dirty a little bit. And Microsoft provides a couple tools, one of which we'll be looking at, which is called the Elastic Database Tool, which is where you can kind of get into some of the more really interesting horizontal scaling techniques. Microsoft makes that. They provide some tools that make that really, really, really easy. So introducing Azure SQL Database, what is it? So how many of you are familiar with SQL Server at all? All right, more hands, quite a few, almost everyone. It is very similar, all right? We're going to look at it SSMS, like that's always how I like to jump into a technology. Just show me, let me feel it, let me get hands-on. What does it feel like? What does it look like? You're going to work with it in almost the same way. It is the platform as a service version of SQL Server. What does that mean? That means that it's very much push button get database, all right? You don't have to spin up a VM, you don't have to spin up install a server, you don't have to worry about upgrading the server and getting maintenance windows and all that stuff. It is ultimately very flexible. Also, you can make it faster, slower, cheaper, more expensive, all effectively at the push of a button. So it's very, very flexible. Most of the things that you can do with it are, don't require any maintenance windows or downtime. So again, opening up some pretty cool options that you can't really do as easily with an on-prem solution or other solutions. So if you want to know more about what the differences are, there's a few capability differences. Microsoft has already published a really great article explaining exactly what those differences are. I'll list 2 real quick. One of them is, the first thing I came across is that Azure SQL Database, whenever you deal with dates, it will, if you do get date or get now, it's going to return UTC. Always, 100% of the time, you can't change that. If you do that on an on-prem server, frequently, depending on how you have it configured, it'll return where the server is located. It'll be time zone specific. That can break some things. Another difference is that if you ever used a CLR stored procedure, that's not available in Azure SQL Database. But again, there's really not too many differences, and they're all pretty well documented. The first thing I kind of wanted to talk about here is the line has intentionally gotten blurred. Microsoft has blurred the line between on-prem SQL Server 2016 and the cloud. They've actually released a couple features that make it fuzzy. The two are really talking to each other. They have a couple interesting features. I just wanted to touch on that for one slide here. The first one is a very small little nugget that I'll talk about is because I just mentioned the fact that one difference, really the only like usual game, application breaking change I've seen is sometimes the way the time zones are handled. 2016, which is available, this syntax available both in Azure and SQL Server 2016 on-prem. Really, really nice syntax available now at time zone that allows you to instantly convert a date from one time zone, for example, from UTC to East Coast or from East Coast to UTC. That effectively makes it a one-line script that you can take a database that were on-prem and you have to shift some of those date times to UTC. You can do that really quick. Polybase. That's a huge feature. I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot tonight because it's its own thing. But what is Polybase? Polybase is where you can take an on-prem SQL Server 2016 and begin to reach out, connect it, link it to another server. Usually it's going to be a Hadoop server in Azure or where else, with HD Insight is a common example. And you can actually query HD Insight, your Hadoop cluster, directly from SSMS, which is really, really, really slick. And in fact, it's smart enough to know that depending on the workload you're about to issue, it will either try to run it quickly and using just linking over to the data source, to the distributed file system, or it might actually take your query and make it a distributed job, which is just, it's magic. It's kind of mind-blowing. And then there's another feature called Stretch Database. Stretch Database is where you can essentially link your on-prem SQL Server to a service that they call Azure SQL Stretch Database, which really is an Azure SQL database, but they price it differently. And you can define tables or a query, rows within those tables, to say if they meet that filter, it's going to transparently offload those records into the cloud. Common use case there is you have really old data and you kind of want to archive it into like a warm spare. You can kind of now do that completely seamlessly. It's really slick, and as you can see, I mean, where's Microsoft taking this? It's just the line is getting blurrier and blurrier between prem and cloud. What I'd like to talk about tonight, as I said earlier, is scaling. The reason I wanted to talk about scaling with regard to Azure SQL Database is because that is where it gets so cool and starts to kind of differ from what you can do with on-prem. Vertical scaling is one option, and what is it? It's when you effectively throw a little bit more hardware at a problem. You scale up, meaning you give it more performance or more capacity, usually for more cost, or you take a database and scale it down, which means you remove some of those capacity, some of those resources, and you make it more affordable. So how do you do that? All right. Very briefly, I'm going to show you how you could do that manually while acknowledging that that's probably too easy. So we're going to look at how to, but I do want to show you. This is where you're probably going to interact with Azure SQL Database, which is the wonderful Azure portal. Here in front of me, I have one of the databases in my little test instance. I have this at the cheapest possible model, which is basic, which has its performance is represented in something called data, I believe, transfer units, DTUs, performance units, and it doesn't have a whole lot. But if I wanted to power it up, literally just drag a slider and click apply, which is great. I mean, what kind of process would I have to go through if I wanted to do that on an on-prem server? I'm not actually going to apply it because that'd be too easy. I wanted to show you how to automate some of this, because that's where the possibilities get really, really interesting. Imagine a situation where you're beginning to capture telemetry about usage and performance in real time from an application. You're able to notice when demand is increasing and you want to say, aha, I want to give this thing more power. Or now it's the middle of Sunday and your demands are reduced. You want to be like, well, this is a great opportunity for me to scale it down and get some money back. That's kind of where I'm going with that. I'm not going to show you how to capture the telemetry, but the automation is important for that reason, which is why I kind of want to focus on it. So I'm going to go through a little situation here, a little scenario where I'm going to take that database and scale it up using Postman, and then I'm going to scale it back down using some C# code. Postman, if you don't know, is a client that allows you to interact with REST APIs, and we're going to be working with the one that Microsoft provides so that you can automatically scale. You can configure or scale a bunch of things, pretty much anything in Azure, but in this case, it's going to be the database I just showed you. All right, so here's the catch. Is it going to make me re-authenticate? Yes, it is. That's okay. I am going to need my... So the hardest part, of course, of all this is authentication. I had to go through a lengthy process to set up authentication. If we just trusted each other in this world, do you know how much more productive we would be? But we don't. So I've actually got to tell this thing who I am for a moment. I really wish Microsoft wouldn't ask me. Can't you just know? Luckily, I only have to do this once. All right. Okay. Almost through the dialogues. All right. Let me make sure this works, and it does. All right, so what did I just do? It worked. Okay. So what I did is I issued a GET to this big giant URL with a bunch of parameters that got kind of stuffed in there. So what are some of those parameters? My subscription, which is my Azure instance. This is the resource group, which is the grouping mechanism that Azure uses. The name of my server and the database. So basically I'm saying, get me information about this database right here. I also had to give it of course, my authentication token, which is the bane of my existence, but that worked. And it returned mostly metadata, but hold on, some meat. Gave me some information about my database. And the part that's relevant here is this, which is that as we saw, I might have kind of glossed over it quickly, but I had that database online in the basic tier, which is their low performance tier. So I see that it's in basic. What I'm going to do is make that a little faster. I'm going to use another command here that is a put. I've got to make sure I use the right token that I just got. Similar parameters, except this case, I'm going to be issuing, I have a payload that I'm going to be uploading, which is this little body here. And really the only difference is that I'm suggesting that I use the S1, which is a faster performance tier. That's the only difference. Click send. It accepted my request, and what is actually really cool here is if I'm lucky and the demo gods shine upon me, this thing occasionally will update in real time and show me that it's updating. In this case, it's not going to be the cool little graphic, but that's okay, because I think this thing refreshes. You know what, if I just F5 this. There it was. I shouldn't have refreshed it. It was on here. It detected, yep, there it is. If I haven't mentioned it, really cool, is the database is completely online. It's getting faster, completely online. You can use it right now. So in my little scenario here, we had a spike of activity. We had telemetry, and we had a job that was running every so often. It was like, all right, if we have more demand, we need to scale this baby up because we have a lot of customers. Then comes, you know, the peak season is out. You know, Christmas is over. We got to scale this thing back down. How do we do that? So let's look at a different approach. Let's look at how to do this in code. I have a little solution here. Make sure I got the right one. The wonderful news is that Microsoft provides tons and tons of toolkits here. So I didn't have to write a whole lot of this code. Most of it I got to utilize. What we're going to do, let me make sure this is set up correctly. I have a couple things here. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it from an S1 back down to a basic, except we're going to do it in code. I've got that configured correctly up here. I'm going to kind of step through this briefly so we can see a little bit of what Microsoft's kind of given us in their toolkits. It's going to ask me for an authentication token. All right, can't trust anyone these days. All right, I have my fancy token, which if you write that down real quick, oh, too late. Too slow. All right, this was a lot better when I had a gigantic monitor, so let me get rid of some of this stuff. All right. So here's the main class. This one is provided by one of the, I believe, the NuGet packages that Microsoft provides. They have this for almost all of their services. Really sophisticated .NET wrappers or C# wrappers around their services. So in this case, what am I doing? I'm going to get information about the database, which is this one, which we're going to talk about later in a second demo. That's the database I just scaled up. And what I actually need to do here, what this line of code is doing, is it's getting me the list of service levels available to that for that database. And I went ahead and I kind of picked out of a list. I said, go get me the one that's in basic. And the reason I did that is because Azure is going to want to know the GUID for it. All right, it doesn't care about the word basic. It wants to have that GUID. So that's why I had to do a lookup there. But otherwise, I'm feeding it this parameter, which is addition, database, and the GUID that I just showed you. It will issue the command, and that was it. Again, I didn't really have to write a whole lot of that code myself. And I'm not going to wait more than a few seconds here, but this thing is going to pop up if I, I'm just going to force that reload. Oh, did I just miss it? Oh, it already did it. Holy cow. Okay. Well, I guess I don't have that many customers. That's a shame. It was like, you know what? You didn't need that many resources to begin with. So that was fast. That was faster than I normally get. So that's cool stuff. Very, very easy. Oh, don't you hate it when a presenter does that? Yeah, me too. All right. All right, so hopefully this is kind of giving you a little bit of a feel for why it's so powerful. Is you can automate this in a way that just isn't possible with traditional installations. And I kind of walked through some of the scenarios. I'm really excited about using this to match, to be able to take an application and tune it for performance or cost dynamically. All right, well, that was vertical scaling, right? That is throw more hardware or not. What other options do we have? Horizontal scaling is a little bit more interesting. Horizontal scaling involves sharding. What is sharding? Sharding is effectively a partition scheme where you say some of my data, instead of living all in one database, some of it's going to live over in one database, some of it's going to live in another database, or some of it's going to live in a bunch of databases, right? So you're starting to break it out that way. This typically requires that you architect your database from the very get-go to support at least what's called a sharding key, which is a one piece of data that is at the row level that tells everything. Does my data go here, 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 or here? Luckily, again, there are some tools that Microsoft provided to make this easy. Still requires some code changes, and especially requires that you gave this consideration or you're able to give this consideration in your database scheme. But they do their best to give us some pretty powerful tools to manage that stuff once you have it set up. So let's look at an example. Imagine that you have a website for an insanely popular SaaS product. Your product is growing like crazy. And if you had an on-prem SQL server, you probably already had to schedule a bunch of maintenance windows, and you gave it more hardware, and you turned it back on. You've already had to do that. Even with an Azure SQL database, you've had to click that slider and make it faster and faster and faster. It's starting to get really expensive. it's getting very expensive at this point because once you get up into the higher tiers, it's actually a non-linear price increase. So what else? What other options do you have? In a scenario like this, where you have a database that has a bunch of different silos of customer data, you might observe that most of the time, the data in a customer does not interact with the data outside of that customer. So for example, if you're logged in as a user of company 1, you're looking at company 1 data. You're not looking at company 3 data. Similarly, you're logged in as company 4, you're not looking a whole lot at company 1, 2, or 3. If you can find yourself saying stuff like that, you have a great scenario for sharding. So how does that work? Let me get my little power laser here. First thing you got to do is you got to pick a sharding key. In my simple example, the one that would be obvious is the company ID. What that sharding key is again, it's a way to say this number dictates whether I go to here, 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 or here. The other part is a sharding map, which is the actual definition of once I know what the number is or the key, how do I know where to go? Where does my map to go? And in this simple example, I have a sharding map that is defined by 2 ranges. On the left, we have a range 1 to 2. On the right, we have a range 3 to 10. So for example, if I had a key of 2, I would go into the left database. If I have a key of 4, I would go into the right database. So let's put this all together. Here's a question. Can you combine vertical and horizontal scaling? And the answer is yes, and you should. One of the things that you get access to if you do horizontal scaling via sharding is the fact that you can independently scale these things. So for example, you can move out your customer data into different shards. Usually, if you can, you're going to put a couple customers still in one. You're not going to necessarily give them each individual databases, although you can. And what you can do is, again, with some telemetry coming in, some real-time data that you monitor, you can identify hotspots, meaning I see an increased activity in shard 3 there. I don't know if it's permanent. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to last, but I do see that it's gotten hot. You can use vertical scaling to give just that one database way more power without having to waste all that performance on all the other databases, or maybe they're paying you differently. Whatever it is, it gives you a lot of control over the performance you're going to give to just a section of your users or your data. This is a quick little slide here, which kind of shows, I got it from, courtesy Microsoft, of all the tools really, arguably that you could put in an industrial grade solution here. So some of the things that we're looking at here, some of these databases are sharded, some of them are an elastic database pool, which effectively is a way to buy server level resources that are shared among all the databases in that pool/server. I kind of think of it as a virtual server. And some of the things on the edge here, split merge tool, transactions, those are actually tools that are provided in the Elastic Database Tools. We're going to be looking at one of those tonight. So why should I care? Because scalable is flexible. A scalable system is a flexible system. You can tune your system for cost savings, or you can tune your system for performance, and you can do it dynamically. That's why I think you should care. All right, so let's do a demo. All right, so here, I promised you something that's interactive. If you have a phone or a laptop, please navigate to this website. I had it professionally done. It's wonderful. I'll leave it on the screen there for just a second. You'll also see it from my little browser window here as I go over there. All right, so here it is, this lovely monstrosity. I had it professionally done. So far, the feedback has been that I paid too much. And if I'm honest here, I actually made it myself. And clearly, I was in a deep and profound sugar high when I made this. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to register. This is super fast. I didn't bother with the password. I'm going to go hello there, because I'm pretty sure that username is not selected. And you get to win candy. So I'm going to say I like Fifth Avenue. And you get to play my favorite game, which is rock, paper, scissors, which is a perfectly great game that requires no thinking. It's all random. So what you might not know is that this is the Tom Sawyer approach to creating test data. Right now, all of you are helping me create some test data. And the thing that's interesting is that this is a sharded database. So I'm going to give this maybe just another 30 seconds while you lose horribly to the AI in rock, paper, scissors. And we're actually going to see how each one of you has created data that has been sharded. We're going to look at how that works. All right, so I'm going to kind of cheat here and see how everyone's doing. Oh yeah, we have a lot of users. Okay, great. So what we can actually see right away is that some of the data here, meaning your identity as a shopper, because I have a really stupid simple database here. It's got like shopper, products, and orders. That's it. Everything associated with you as a shopper and your orders are going into one database or another. We can see that that's already happening here, which is pretty cool. So let's look at how that works. First thing I'll do here is kind of show you real quick, what does this data look like? So the schema itself is pretty simple. Just really those two tables. But what we can see is that, again, the data is being broken up across a couple different instances. Yeah. So one thing you might observe here is that the way it appears to be moving the data, can anyone spot the difference? Even a nod, right in that shopper ID. That's my key right there. And you're allowed to define the function that dictates that. And right now I'm just using modulus, even or odd. I'm going to kind of all of this information. You might be at this point asking, what is the difference between all these databases here? 0 and 1 are my two normal shards. 2 is actually my overflow shard that doesn't have anyone in it yet. But I'm going to show you how you can move data right into that shard. Again, for an example, like a hotspot, or maybe you have a customer who paid for an upgrade in service, and now they get their own dedicated shard or database. And then there's this one. This SMM stands for Shard Map Manager, and that is the database that is created by the tooling that Microsoft provides in the Elastic Data Tools. And it does love GUIDs. I'm not going to kind of go through this in too much detail, but really the meat of it here, which is when we issue a query, and we'll look at the code for the website, but what's happening is the traffic cop is that database, and it's the code associated with that database. You log in, and it will either create, or you will log in, and it'll say, okay, you're 2. That's your number. That's your key. Where do I go? And it's actually right there in that column. In this case, 2 would be this value, which would mean it would get this shard, which is ultimately going to relate to, which is up here somewhere. That's actually this first one. It's going, there we are. It's going to point you to that database. That's kind of how it works behind the scenes. You're not supposed to touch that.
Quick question, and
Yes.
before I ask the question, quick announcement. We are recording this again. If you want to ask a question, I can give you the mic, or if you're online, you can ask a question and I will repeat it. Just remember you're being recorded, and this will be posted to YouTube. Having said that, what is any best practices that you would know of around how to set this up? Like, does the system automatically figure out all your sharding patterns? Are there ones that you would choose? Any other background around how one would go about looking into that, or references?
That is a fantastic question. I'm going to touch on that a little bit, but I can answer that right now. It is the most important thing. Picking your sharding key and how it is embedded into your system is basically the most important part of creating a scheme. I will show you real quick. We're actually going to look. It does not auto configure itself. I will show you the code that where you have to tell the tooling how to know, like, how does it know that you have a shopper, but then that shopper has all this associated data. You want to move something from one shard to another, right? That's the promise of this technology, and that's virtually automatic. How does it know that? Well, you kind of have to tell it that there's this, and this is all the data that should be eligible for being moved in a shard, because not all that data is meant to be moved between shards. Sometimes you have lookup tables. Those lookup tables aren't supposed to be moved. They're supposed to be the same in every table. So one of the things that you'll do, at least according to this, there's many ways to actually shard data. This is only one way to do it. One way to do it is you include shopper ID, which is my sharding key, as part of the primary key in every table. This is a composite primary key. So that is one way to do this, and that's how I've done it here in the simplistic example, is every table that is going to be, is going to have some data that is eligible for shard management, actually has the sharding key right in, it's certainly got to be in the table. You don't have to necessarily put it in the primary key, but I did because that guarantees global uniqueness. That way you're guaranteeing that you can move that thing anywhere, and it's going to be globally unique. You can use a GUID to do that too. I didn't. It's a good question. All right, so let's look at some of the code here. This is actually, it's a great question in terms of timing, because what I wanted to show you next is how this thing gets configured, because you do. You have to configure this ahead of time. Before anyone can come into that system and create one row, you have to kind of configure not only your database structure, but also you have to provide the tooling. Ultimately, it's all the data that is going into that map manager database. Where do all these rows come from? The answer is they come from this code, which I'm going to kind of go through a little quickly, mostly to point out that these tools are made available by Microsoft through the Elastic Database Tools. But what we do here, like really the meat, like this, what this is doing, as you can see, it's mostly creating the database, which by the way is really awesome, because you can create, if you create a database on an on-prem server, it's sharing the same VM resources usually, right? But here, that is absolutely not true. If you create it in Azure, it can get its own dedicated resources, and by default, unless you plop it in a pool, it is going to get its own dedicated resources. So unlike on-prem, you create another database that's the same as the one before it, you've doubled your resources, which is kind of a profound thing. Here is the magic code right here. Register sharding schema. This is where I had to tell it how to be smart. I said that the products table, which, remember, had static information, right? This is going to be true across all of my shards. I called that a reference table, or it wants to call that a reference table. But then these two are going to be eligible for shard management. So I had to say, here's a shopper table, and here's an order table, and how do I know how to shard it? In this case, it's the same key in both cases. There's really good examples for how to do this, but that's really the meat of it. The rest of it is just registration, but it's really this piece right there that is how you are giving the tooling the information it needs to do its job. Actually, I'm going to stay in here. The next piece is, okay, well that's cool. How does the website work? And really, there are, like, I have a simple little MVC controller here. Let's look at the registration process. So what's happening here, actually, it's not where I want to go. I wanted to go to this one. When you register and create a new user, here's another little, this is the one thing I don't like. What is really happening is I'm figuring out if that user already exists. If that key, really, I'm figuring out if that key already exists. If it doesn't, like let's say that you're user 2, right? That's your key. I create it in 2 databases. And under this scheme, this is how you would do it. You would first create it in the SMM database, which I'm treating as the traffic cop, and then you create it in the shard because you have to have. I need some preliminary information, usually through the login process, to know you logged in as Furry. You are too. I need to know that. I need to know where to go to get that. So usually if you have an authentication provider, you can externalize a lot of that. If you're going to keep authentication in-house, that might be something to put in one database that is not sharded, because I need to be able to translate your login from Eric Furry to 2. Once I have 2, your shard key, the rest is magic. So that's an important point. You have to be able to get that shard key. All right, so you're going to have to, in my case, I put that in a non-sharded database. And the other thing I wanted to show you was how to do pretty much anything else. How do I do any kind of sharded operation? So let's do the order, which really is, you won rock, paper, scissors. That's what happened there. Site winner. This is it. So I passed over it because I forgot how similar this was. I'm using Entity Framework, and what I want to do is I want to create an order, and I want to make sure that that goes in the right sharded database. That looks pretty similar, doesn't it? That's just how Entity Framework looks. If you have any experience with it, it's pretty similar. The magic is embedded in the connection. So I have this little function here called create data context. If I look at that, now I'm using a tool that was provided. Well, these tools are provided by the toolkit, and it returns back to me the connection string based on what information I used to configure the tooling in the first place. And unsurprisingly, there's my shard key, and I give it some other information here, and it's able to give me back my connection. So really, we kind of demystified the magic behind this. How am I able to use regular old Entity Framework code and just have it automatically, deal with, you're logged in as 2, you go here, you're logged in as 4, you go here. It's really swapping in and out connection strings. That's really what it's doing. What you might, if you're really, really super observant, you might have asked the question, well, if that's true, how can I query across all of my shards? There's going to be some management, needs where that's going to happen. And this one page right here is an example of that. This was a query that I ran across multiple shards. How did I do that? And they do provide a little tool for that, which I'll show next. Order summary. That's my little page. What I did is I'm effectively running a baked SQL query. It is not using SQL injection. There's no parameters, I promise. Also, probably the only time in my entire career I've used pivot. Hey, that's a plus. Look at that. I love pivot. Basically providing all the data that's going to power that little grid. But what it's going to do is it's going to run this little function in the toolkit called multi-shard query. What I've realized is again, nothing about this is magic. What it's really doing, I think, although I don't think they told me, I don't think it's documented, is it's really running the query in parallel against all the shards and then unioning the result sets together. That's really what's happening, which is why I had to order it afterwards. Even if I had put an order statement in there, it's going to order it by shard. And then if I want to have an order that is across data that's all, for all the shards, I have to order it separately. In this case, I had to do that in code. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not magic. That's just how it's working. All right, so there's one last thing here. I will demo, and then I'm done. So the promise of this is that, again, you have an application that's demanding. In this case, that's funny. Bobby dropped tables. Good for you. Didn't work. I was going to pick you, but your username's too long. So what I'm going to do is pick me instead. The idea is, what if I could identify hotspot? Someone a particularly demanding user, particularly demanding customer. What do? I would like to give them a dedicated shard, so I should be able to do that. Microsoft, part of the Elastic Data Tools is this thing right here. which is a out-of-the-box thing. You're probably going to want to download it, get the source code, customize it heavily, but they at least make this thing available out of the box, and it will effortlessly move that customer's data. Again, not just the sharding row, but all of the related data that I configured through that schema, and it's going to move it wherever I tell it. It's going to move it into a different shard. So in this case, I have this configured. Some of the capabilities this thing has baked in are features like split, which is to take one shard and break it into two, merge, which is to take two shards and merge it back into one, or move, which is to take one customer's data and move it somewhere else, which is the option I'm going to choose. Hopefully I don't have to fill this all out again, but sometimes the page, you know what, I think this should be fine if I actually pick number 4 here. Actually, that wasn't the ID. Tell you what, I gotta actually go figure out whose ID that was. Let me just pick someone. Adler, ID 9. Let me make sure that this is, because part of my demo here is to make sure that the data goes away after I'm done here. All right, so we've got, I think it got reordered. All right, so I'm just gonna pick test here. All right, so that's number 1. That was mine from earlier. So I'm gonna take shopper ID 1, and I'm gonna move them into this other shard. This other shard's unused presently. I just created it, never used it. It is, remember, evens are going into 0, odds are going into 1, 2 is reserved. But I want to move this customer's data. This customer is really demanding. It's obviously very fast when you have like whopping kilobytes of data.
While that's going, we had a question come in. Will any of the code or examples or even the slides be available after tonight's presentation?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the last slide I give a GitHub link, so the code absolutely yes. I actually don't think I have the slides, but I'd be happy to. I think the last slide has my email address, so probably unless I get like a deluge of requests, just contact me personally, and then I'll give you the slide deck. And if I get more than 2, then I'll just publish them. All right, this thing is done. That was fast. Let me go check this out. All right, so really the acid test here, if this thing worked, is that number 1 is no longer there, right? That's what we're hoping. And it's not. And in fact, obviously, I shouldn't see 1 in the shopper ID. This last table here is the orders. That's, you know, all the order. That's the magic here, by the way, is it's not just it took 1 row and it moved it. It's that it took 1 row and all the related data and moved all of it. That's the magic. It looks like it worked, so maybe the last test here is to use my little fancy page, and where's test? Test is here, and test is in 2. It's the only one in 2, so that worked, which is pretty slick. So that's about it. All right. I think we actually covered some of the most important points. We had a really good question before. The horizontal scaling, the trick is that key, is defining the schema, defining the sharding key. And, you know, I think with Elastic Data Tools, Microsoft has made it very easy to build applications that do this. But sharding has existed long before. Like, we're not inventing anything here. Really, the realization for me is that between the tooling that Microsoft is providing and the capabilities that Azure SQL Database has, is I think really the value and the potential out of these schemes is really hit some kind of threshold that it's really something everyone should be considering, because you can very easily scale out wide and you can scale tall and you can do both and you can automate the whole thing. It's really a game changer in my opinion. All right, so I did publish them. So, you know, the one question we got was a great question. This is where I have the code published. You will be disappointed that the code that is there is Halloween themed, not Easter themed. I am so sorry, but Halloween's fun too. So, and if you need any, you know, if you'd like to get the slide deck or anything like that, please reach out to me. My email address is here. And certainly if you are looking for a development job, please reach out. That'd be great. Any questions? Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know if I'm going to be. I promise I will either figure this out in 30 minutes or I will. So the question is, I had said that, key part of this is the sharding function. In other words, you're coming in, you're user 4. How do I know if that means you go to this shard, or this shard? I kind of glossed over, for the sake of time, one little caveat with sharding schemes, which is because I have to take two pieces and put them together really quick for you. I might not be able to find the code, but it's probably more effective if I just talk to your point. The first thing you have to do is the tooling that I was looking at, Elastic Data Tools, gives you two options for defining a shard map. One is that you get to say a range, which is any number that is 1 to 100. Anything in that range is going to go here, or anything that is 101 to 1,000 is going to go here. That's one way. It's called a range map. The other way is called a point map, which is where for every shard key, you give it specific instructions that say, year 1, you go here, year 2, you go here, year 3, you go here. I chose the second one because then I just had C# code that did, what I did is when you register, it creates your user account in my central database, right? The traffic cop, right? This is not the sharded database. This is the central one. So it spits out an auto increment, year 2, and I use C# code that just says even or odd. Based on that, I create a little mapping that says a point mapping, a point shard map, real quick, that says this number goes to this database, and that's it. The reason that the modulus or whatever function you use is only ever used once. The shard map manager doesn't care about modulus at all. It's not built into the shard map manager at all. And the reason that's valuable is because, in the general case here, I was saying odds go here, evens go here. But what did I do? I took someone who I think was even or odd, who cares, and I moved them into the spare shard. So that would have defied my little scheme. And that's why it's useful to have those point-to-point mappings, is that up front, I'm saying evens go here, odds go here, but I reserve the right anytime later to say, oh no, I'm going to make an exception to that. I'm going to make you go over here even though you're even. And obviously, that gives you the power to, I chose a very simple modulus as my sharding scheme. That means you can have arbitrarily complex schemes to define how you shard data. All right, any other questions? All right, thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have Rufus coming up to do it's okay. I'll take a minute. I'll totally just dance on over here and I'll distract everybody from this magic on the back end. We have Rufus coming up to do serverless and Azure functions. So that's going to be awesome as well. I'm kind of moving around. I probably shouldn't do that. I do want to make an announcement while we switch between them. We also, once again, have Azure credits, courtesy of Microsoft. It is the Azure Developer Advocates Group. I want to say that right. So thank you to them. It is a $300 credit. You need to activate it by, I want to say, May 7th, beginning of May, which is longer than the last time we had. It was only a couple weeks, so these are new. So if anybody wants one of those, it is $100 a month for 3 months, and you can see our awesome sponsor and committee member for this group, Brian. He has them in his hand, so please see him immediately following the meeting, and he will have them. The key with these, as the last time, for those who may remember, is that these do not require a credit card to sign up and utilize. Normally, if you get a free Azure account, you have to provide a credit card in order to utilize it. These do not. So these are the special ones directly from the Developer Advocacy Group. So please see him after the meeting if you would like one of those. You good? And if Rufus is good, you'll try your audio.
Check, test 1, 2. Sounds like we're on. Can everyone hear me sufficiently well? Well, good evening. Thank you again for coming out. And not that the first session was long-winded, but this one is shorter. So, good news if you're tired of sitting. As stated, we want to talk a little bit about serverless and how to do serverless on the Azure platform. Things that we're going to cover. why you want to use it, what it is, why you should care about serverless, how to get started, the types of functions, how to kind of start small with your prototypes, and then scale those for building for the enterprise, and then just some other considerations as you're planning your function usage for your cloud architecture. So yes, serverless is a bit of a there are still servers involved. I kind of define serverless as the following. So really, it takes that responsibility of having to own and provision and maintain, patch your servers, and lets you focus on what you do best. Writing business logic for your company, for writing the code that gets the task done that you have to do. So why should you care? Just a simple list. It often dramatically simplifies your deployment, maintenance, and cost. So the concept of paying for what you use, it's very compelling, depending on your particular use case and scenario. So without doing too much PowerPointing, we'll jump right into a kind of the first way that I see the Azure functions being useful is for rapid prototyping. So we're going to start with Azure Functions in the portal to get started with your kind of proof of concept and prototype needs. So I am going to jump right over to the portal. Light that up. And do one of these. All right. So here I've got a standard dashboard, and I have pre-created some Azure function apps, but I will show you how to do that. So we come here to our add button of all things Azure, and you're creating a function app, and if you're familiar with creating web apps and running web apps, you'll, as we go through this, find a lot of similarities and functionality that is in fact due to the fact that function apps kind of sit on top of the web app functionality. And we'll see that as we go through this demo. So, app name needs to be unique. Resource group, OS consumption plan is your the default hosting plan option. We'll talk about reasons why you'd want to select an app service plan over a consumption plan a little bit later. I'm going to leave that defaulted as a consumption plan. I'm going to put this in the East US region. As you can see here, it's asking for a storage account. All function apps use a storage account for their plumbing. So you could use an existing storage account. I recommend you create a storage account for each function app that you're going to use. That way, things don't get stepped on. I don't think it works very well, actually. If you use try to reuse storage apps, storage accounts for your function app. I'm going to turn Application Insights on. That's just going to automatically create an Application Insights instance and link that up for me. So I'll go ahead and click Create, and that's going to validate these options and go off and create that. While it's doing that, I'm going to jump over to my demo app, function app here. As you can see, this is on a consumption plan. And the first demo, and just to show you, this is a fresh function app. It does not have any functions. I've not changed any default settings beyond the initial settings on creating it. So the first function that I'd like to demo is a queue processing function. And you'll see as you go through the portal here, they give you some, kind of some basic scenarios and templates to choose from. When you drill down into kind of all of the options that they give you that there are quite a few. So these are starter templates that will get you going for the particular scenario that you have. Many of them are similar. They're just focused on that particular type of trigger, that particular type of workflow. They have experimental language support disabled by default, but if I enable that, you'll see a whole bunch of other languages pop up here as well. So I am going to create and it's sorted differently here. Let me move down. I probably already passed it. There's my, yes, queue trigger. So I'm going to create a queue trigger. Again, you have these language options. I'm primarily a C# developer, so I'm going to choose C#. And I'm going to call this process my new queue. And you specify the queue name that you want to look at. And so I'm going to call this here. You also specify a storage account connection. For the sake of the demo, I'm going to use the same storage connection that was created as part of the function app. This is a connection string that's stored in your function app. So, typically this would be a separate queue that, or separate storage account that you would use for this particular queue trigger scenario. And what you see here to get you up and running really quickly is a default template that logs some information from your queue item. The interface here gives you the nice ability to test your function. It gives you a little streaming log view as well. And right out of the box, I can click run. I get a nice response code over here. And in the logs here, you can see that my trigger function has processed this sample queue data. So I'm going to pull up an instance of the Storage Explorer so we can see how this is working. So you'll find your the storage account that was created in the settings here of the function app. So under the application settings, it has the key, so I'm not going to bring that up at the moment, but that's where you'd find that. So I've already done that, and I know that it's using this particular storage account that was created with that. And I take a look at back over here on the function. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. The queue name that we used, I'm going to copy that. And I'm going to create that new queue. So this is very fresh here. And add a message. To this queue and jump back over to my function with the logs. So you can see here in the streaming log service, this is my live queue message that was just created over in Storage Explorer. And if I refresh my queue over here, I see indeed that message has been removed. Some interesting things if you've not used Azure Functions before with the C# is that this is running script CS, so you'll see the CSX extension here indicating that this is script CS. So you get some capability here, and I'm going to go steal some code snippets that I have pre-made. And the important thing to note about script CS is it's fully C# in its syntax and capability. The runtime for this function app is running off of .NET Full Framework. There's a preview version of function apps, and I'll show you where that setting is, that allows you to run on .NET Core and gives you some other capabilities. But the important thing to note about script CS is it takes your C# here and compiles that real time into its own class. So anything that you can put into a class, for the most part, you can put here into your CSX. So here I'm going to add a message object, and I'm going to quick change this to my message. And if I come over to my test and I put in another snippet, so I'm going to put in some JSON formatted data here with an ID, a message, and a date field called important date. With some log messages. And I'm going to save and run this. And we'll see here, let me hide this so we can see the log message better. You see it compiled on the fly. It detected the change, started the function, and processed the message. So from the modified code, you see I'm using the myQ item with the message property that was defined up here. All right, so that's queue functions. Similarly, I'm not going to go too far in depth. You have blob triggers. So in a scenario where you have a workflow where your website or your application accepts file uploads through your application, or you have a process that is downloading files, and you want that action of that blob being stored to kick off another workflow, that's where your blob trigger comes in. items. That gets there we go. Again, I'm going to choose C#. And I'll use the default there. I'm going to use my storage connection string, that same storage account. And the default here has a log message that gives you the name and the length of the blob item. So I'm going to come back here to my Storage Explorer, create that container, and I have some text files. And I'm going to upload. So 1 kilobyte file, pretty small, just a all right, so that's uploading. So I have a new file here in my blob storage, and if I switch back over to, it's already detected that there's a new file there and has output the log message with the name, new Azure Functions demo file, and the size. One more here. Apologies for those with headphones on. That was probably loud. So I have a little bit larger file here. I'm going to upload that. Okay, that went quickly. Or it will, yep. And then back over to my log. So here's here's my another demo file, txt processing through the function. You might have thought that perhaps a larger file would have taken longer to execute and be processed, but that's not the case. I noticed just anecdotally through my own experience, up to a gigabyte, there's no real difference. You are getting a stream, so you can choose to pull that file in or not. And so in the interest of time, I'll just kind of browse through the rest here just to give you an idea. HTTP trigger functions. If you're looking to create a simple API, or you want to stub out an API for a client that if you're on a team that's responsible for generating an API, you can quickly stub out that API here using HTTP triggers. That you have webhook capability. They give you a lot of different templates out of the box. So they give you kind of pre-built GitHub webhooks, and a whole host of other things. SendGrid, scheduled mail. This was a recent one when I was preparing for tonight. I hadn't seen this face locator template. So that's handy. SAS token generator, that's also handy if you're trying to access a lot of files out of blob storage. And you can kind of see the whole list here of templates that they give you. So that covers the rapid prototyping. If you're looking to do some simple local development, um, and you've got VS Code, you've got all the tools you need in order to do that. So what I'm going to do is take the code that we created in that first demo from this function, and I'm going to pull that locally to my machine here and open that up in Visual Studio Code. And one of the benefits that you get, I mentioned deployment as a reason or a way that as a reason for being interested in serverless and using Azure functions is the deployment scenario. One of the ways to deploy to an Azure function is by using a local Git repository to the function. So let's take a look. So here I'm going to set up my deployment options, and I'm going to tell it that I want to deploy. So you can see I can integrate with my CI and create a CD pipeline right from my team services account. I can upload to a folder in OneDrive. I can have it watch GitHub or Bitbucket, Dropbox, etc. So I'm going to, for this demo, set up a local Git repository. All right, so that is connected. And I'm going to grab my clone URL. And in my command line, so that's prompting me for credentials. I will show that window. I'm going to pre-pulled those credentials, so I have those handy. I can just paste that in. The credentials I'm using are from the publish profile. If you're familiar with web apps, it's the same publish profile. You can also use your master deploy user for that subscription. Cross my fingers. Okay, so I've just cloned that function app, and I want to take my, kind of build out my prototype. So I'm going to open that folder in VS Code, azfuncdemo. And here I have my two functions, process my new queue and process blob file. So this is the same run CSX that we were looking at online. So it's giving me some errors here. It's noting some problems. It doesn't understand what TraceWriter is. Some of the new Azure functions, it's still in preview. That plays a little bit nicer with the version 2.0 that's in preview of the function apps that's based on .NET Core. You'll see, to demo this here, if we add log.info finished processing and save that, this is a repo. There we go. I have a change. My new. Yes, sir.
Hey, quick question coming through the stream.
Go for it.
A question, is there a special extension or something that you use or need to install to do this with VS Code?
There is no special extension required. There are a number of extensions that are useful and helpful. So here, let me just show you some of the ones that I have here. Basically, all of the Azure templates. So in particular, the Azure Functions extension. You can see this is in preview. And it kind of walks you through how to use it, how to set it up. It modifies your function app to work with VS Code and debugging. This is based on the .NET Core 2 version of the functions runtime. And Azure Storage gives you a little storage view, also in preview inside of VS Code. So that those are some of the common ones that I use. So I'm going to add this log processing. I'm going to push that up, and I'm going to show you the git log of what that does. All right, so that's synced. And if you look here, you'll see the deployment messages that were generated by that remote repository. It's using Git hooks on the function app side. So the code that's running and the local repository that I created are not the same structure, so are not in the same folder. So it deploys to that local Git, which is in a separate folder, and then does a deployment. It has a deployment script that runs in the background that syncs that up with your function app. So let's go take a look and see that code change in our function app here. You'll notice a new message. Once you've enabled a deployment method, you get this message. It automatically switches you into read-only mode because of your source control integration. You can override that at your peril and make changes live to your function if you so desire. But you'll see that there's that new log info message that we added there. And if I rerun this test with a new number, so we have our here's your message, and we have our finished processing message that we added. So you'll notice I have a bug here in my code. So I'm outputting the message twice. So it's hard to see on this screen, so that's probably not noticed, but I have the message coming out in both the message and the date. So I'm going to update that to import date. Save it. I like to know what my tools are doing with my Git repos, so I like the Git output here. So we're pushing the new code, and then it'll launch another deployment. Deployment successful. Run my test again. And now I have the date value in the log. One last piece. So we've covered the prototyping and the demo, we have the VS Code demo, and then the last piece is really where I think things get interesting, and this one's quick. I know I'm a little over time here. That am I good? Okay. So I'll continue. Lucky you. In Visual Studio, this is where the story gets really interesting for me as far as integrating applications with your existing enterprise library. Maybe you're in the situation where you're developing a completely greenfield application, and you don't have any existing data access kind of layers and code that logging frameworks and other things that you have built up, but perhaps you do, and you want to leverage some of those as part of your function. That's where the Visual Studio scenario really shines, I think. So I'll just quickly come through here. And we're going to create a new project. And you can see under Visual C#, there's a cloud section. I've apparently recently been using Azure Function template, so here it's pre-selected for me. And I'm going to create and you get some of the same selection options that you get in the portal. So you can choose the .NET Framework or the Azure Functions .NET Core version. I'm sticking with the .NET Framework. I'm going to do a queue trigger. You also have the option of using the storage emulator. I'm going to use the actual storage account here that I created, azfuncdemo int01, and I'm going to call new int queue items, save that off. We'll give that a minute to create that. So this should look fairly similar to what we did in the portal. I'm going to hide that for a minute. So I have some decorators here that give me some of the binding for the function app. So I'm going to call this process my new queue. A few things you have to fill in. Web. Where is it? I want to use the same one. Probably going to end up displaying the key and have to delete this. Very cool. Oh, there we go. It's again, the storage connection is out of your settings. So I'm going to use the Azure Web Jobs storage. Back here. going to set a breakpoint because, you know, that's what we do in Visual Studio. I like to set breakpoints. And then, oh, I closed that without saving the changes. That's what that was warning me about. Can't get that second U tonight. All right, so come set up. So what I'm going to do is run this, and if this is the first time you've run a function app within Visual Studio, within your Visual Studio 2017 instance, because everybody like installs the preview version, right? It has multiple Visual Studio 2017s on their machine. No? Okay, just me. Anyway, so if it's the first time, you'll get a prompt that says, do you want to install the tools for local debugging? And you'll say yes to that, and it'll connect, download those tools, and bring up. It will run from this path the func.exe, and this is a fully capable, functional version of the WebJobs host that runs your function app in the cloud for your local development environment. So you'll see I have the job host started. It's new ent function app. It's finding function one based on the file name, and it's calling and naming it there. So it looks like just based on the logging messages that we are set. So I'm going to come over to my storage queue or storage explorer and pull this open. That was another queue I was playing with. So there's the queue as I named it. So I'm just going to add a message. And that keeps popping up there. There we go. This is a new ES. So that has added to the queue. And then everything is wired up correctly. Yes. I'm going to jump back over here. You'll see a log message saying that it's the host here is detecting a new message, and it will jump right into your code. And here's my queue item. This is the new VS 2017 demo message. Here you have full Visual Studio, and you know, can bring in your libraries, and you know, have your classes you know, organized how you like here, and it will compile those into an assembly and deploy that. I'm not going to deploy this in the interest of time because we are getting low on time. So I think let me just have that run through, and then you'll see here in your func.exe that the function completed. So that's something that's nice. Here you don't have to set a breakpoint to make sure you you know, catch the end of the execution like you do with a you know, like a console application that you're testing. Question?
Yes, could you give a little more insight into the debugging experience in general for functions, and then if there's any notable differences between code versus the full Visual Studio? Because I think I saw you switch between them.
Yes, we jumped to Visual Studio here. I think the biggest, the most notable difference for debugging and the reason why you want to use Visual Studio is if you're using .NET full framework and you're using the function app runtime version 1. You can see here in my path for this func.exe, that's 1.09. So when you're selecting the function runtime for your function app, you have that choice between version 1 and version 2. Version 2 runs on .NET Core, and right now the tooling support is around that version 2 in Visual Studio Code. So if you're doing full framework to get this nice breakpoint debugging experience, you'll want to use Visual Studio and for your function development. So it kind of depends on your your workflow. You can still run the. Let me jump back over to Visual Studio Code. So I can still run this app from the command line. Fun demo. It would be fun, but didn't call it that. From here, I have the command line func available. You can see that's the version 1.09. I have some links at the end for where to install these tools, how to get them, and how to get started with that at the end of the PowerPoint presentation. So what I can do right from here is say func host start. That I didn't set my connection string. So if I come in here to that one, so I don't have the local settings JSON. So I would need to create the connection string for that Azure connection and put that here. That's stored in the function app. It didn't pull down. It's a settings file, so it's not part of the Git repo. I can run the function host from the command line once I have my settings done properly, and I'll get the same sort of output that I get here from hitting F5 in Visual Studio. I just won't get the breakpoints using in Visual Studio Code that I do in Visual Studio 2017. Does that answer the question? All right, let's jump back here, wrap up just a few final notes. These are some sample use case examples, certainly not a comprehensive list. Just as we saw, this is kind of a summary. We have all different sorts of triggers, off of Event Grid, Event Hub, Cosmos DB triggers, IoT Hub, webhooks. There are also many examples out on GitHub of various other types of Azure function trigger templates that are pre-built. Things like turning a Twilio message into a Slack message, kind of converting that API. Something we didn't cover tonight is aggregated API endpoints, and that's the proxy capability. So in Azure Functions, through the portal, let me just jump over and kind of point you in the right direction for finding some of these settings. So I kind of gave you a sneak peek at this before when I had to come over and grab the path or the queue name earlier. So that, this is like triggers on your process. You can add keys, like if you have an HTTP endpoint, and so you can provide a access key monitoring. This is somewhat limited. It does does give you some information, but Application Insights has the live stream event and all of the things that Application Insights gives you. So definitely link your function app up to Application Insights. Proxies and slots, those are two things we didn't cover. If you're looking to create an API, kind of a solidified single point API that aggregates multiple API backends, proxies is a really good way to do that. So like, I'm in read only because I've enabled the integration. But proxies is a good way to do that. Slots, that's deployment slots. So, in a production environment, in your continuous delivery pipeline, you want to deploy to a slot and trigger an automatic swap of that slot. So, common use case is, creating a test or a staging type of slot. Then when you deploy to that staging slot and have it trigger either automatically or not a swap into production when you're ready to do that. Point of note on slots, it works the same way that web application slots work, in that it's like another copy, another instance running of your function app. So it will have its own storage account. So that's something that you'll want to keep in mind. And so aggregated API, background tasks, general process glue, some other things. So you can start small, real quickly. You might think of serverless or function apps. How can I, can I really scale? Does it really perform? How can I scale? This link for scaling, you can see from the app service team how they configured their Azure function to process that many events per second. Hint, they were batching and using an app service plan. So, you can integrate with Event Grid, Service Bus. Those are just some samples. I like their diagram, so I kind of brought that over. You'll see that on the one link that I gave. Over here, Azure Functions as an event handler. So they were batching from that. And then just to wrap up, functions solve a variety of needs in your cloud architecture design. Language of your choice, so individual teams can use their skills. It's super simple and straightforward to get started, so there's really no reason not to try them out and add them to your cloud architecture toolbox. And like I said, it can scale. And just final notes, some other considerations. Consumption plans, they shut down, so reasons for using a consumption versus app service plan: if you need to connect to a virtual net, if you have long running and large memory usage scenarios, long running being more than 10 minutes, large memory being larger than 1.5 gigs of RAM needed for your application, for your function, and then stateful workflows via durable functions. It's something that's in preview that's coming. So that's all I really had. Any final questions before we jump out?
Working in concert with Fabric, or I really just use Service Fabric?
Service Fabric is different. Service Fabric, this is a technology built on top of the web application platform. So using the kind of the web jobs host, Service Fabric. Tim, actually, you talked about that with your service bus, I think, a little bit. You touched on that. That was so that's more for managing your kind of microservice infrastructure, you know, right. Right.
So just again, what the serverless functions are built on top of the app services. So they're kind of what better described as mini app services, and Service Fabric is more for a larger scale microservice architecture, which we may be going into next month actually as an intro.
Nice.
This is an alternative that I would deploy this, deploy the scale completely differently than I was using deploying service.
There's
Yes.
statements, right? There are functions that sit there, something triggers them, they wake up, they do something.
And then they go away.
There's a cost for that waking up.
Service Fabric's like the container management fabric. You're familiar with Docker, Kubernetes, and other things. It's very much in parallel to that.
It's a cluster of VMs.
Right.
Right.
And this you're only paying for what you're using, which is another benefit to it. So if you have small jobs or small functions that you need to run, and a lot of what he described, wakes up because you received a file and you need to do something with it.
Right.
You can, kind of integrate it with logic apps and so do some workflows and things like that.
Right.
A lot of things. A lot of them.
So it scales based on the demand and the load, depending on the trigger type. So like,
Size of your subscription.
well, the queue, for example, the queue trigger, depending on the number of items that you have in your queue, it will spin up additional function hosts and run those in parallel. So if you look, the second link here, Functions Best Practices, talks a lot about scaling and how to scale and how to design your application, your function application, for the purpose of what you're doing. So, and then goes into some of the other topics, like the durable functions and some of those other things. So I would start, the first link like gets you up and running with functions and, getting your local development and, that sort of thing. The second one talks about kind of those bigger picture, where does it fit in the architecture of my, enterprise solutions.
Yeah, with any of that stuff, you want to look at how it scales and the pricing models. So with Azure, there's obviously multiple ways to do a lot of this stuff. And if it makes more sense for you to scale with like Event Grid or Service Bus versus functions or something like that, I mean, they're not direct competitors, but you have to look at your end-to-end solution of what you're trying to do. And that means which part is going to scale up and which is the most cost-effective way. Does it make more sense to put a function with a proxy and an API in front of it? Or does it make more sense to do an Azure website with an API? Based on your consumption model and what your projections are, those are different pricing models, two ways to do very similar things, and that would change how you would scale and how much it would cost you to scale. So you always want to look at what your scaling patterns are for when you do this kind of stuff in Azure. Also, a quick note, all of the links that you saw tonight from both of the speakers, I have tweeted out. We have a tab board, quick tab. So I'm messing up the name. It is in our live stream on Mixer. I tweeted it out, and I will put the link in the Meetup site later tonight as soon as I get home and remember to do that. So unless somebody else wants to do that quicker, we can post it there. And it'll be it's a massive link of all the links from everything that was in both presentations, plus all the other stuff that we were discussing tonight. Also, it will be, if you rewatch this on YouTube, please do that and subscribe. But that link to all the links will be posted underneath the YouTube video as well.
And I will have a share for the slides as well. So that was it. So hopefully this gets you interested in how functions can integrate with your enterprise solutions.
Awesome. That was great. Thank you to you. Thank you to both speakers tonight. That was awesome. Again, please check out our group on YouTube, on Mixer if you can't make the meetings, on Twitter. Please check us out and follow us. Once again, thank you to Nudesic, and Brian is right up here with the Azure credits for 3 months. You don't need to use your credit card, so these are special. Not every option has that. So please come see him, say hi, shake his hand, thank him for sponsoring. Next month, we will be back here, most likely upstairs, same time, probably the second Tuesday, but we'll put that out when we get it. And we're looking at probably Service Fabric and possibly Azure CDN as our topics. But again, we're finalizing that. So cool. Thank you all very much. You have a good night.